There's a moment in every young athlete's career when the people who run the sport start paying attention in a different way. And for Alex, that moment arrived in Cincinnati, in the shadow of a tournament that had just spent $260 million reinventing itself. And at the center of that transformation stood a man named Ben Navarro, a billionaire who made his fortune in credit and debt collection long before he ever thought about owning a piece of professional tennis, and whose daughter Emma happened to be sitting one spot above Alex in the world rankings, and one bracket away from a potential head-to-head that tennis fans had already circled on their calendars. And what makes this story worth telling isn't just the money, though there's plenty of that. It's the timing. Because Alex didn't wander into Cincinnati as some unknown quantity hoping for a wild card, she walked in as the 17th seed with a first-round bye already locked up, riding a wave of momentum that had been building for months. And anyone who had watched her play in Toronto weeks earlier knew exactly why the tournament's ownership group was suddenly circling her name. Because in Toronto, something had happened that doesn't happen very often in tennis. Tickets for her matches were selling out in half an hour, and the stands were filling with thousands of Filipino fans who had traveled from all over North America just to watch one player compete, turning entire sections of the arena into something that looked and sounded like a home game thousands of miles from home. And if you're the owner of a tournament that just poured $250 million into new courts and a sunken stadium and a clubhouse the size of a small hotel, that kind of crowd energy is exactly what you're hoping to bottle. So it's not hard to understand why reports started circulating that Navarro had taken a personal interest in Alex's presence at his event. Whether or not every detail of what was supposedly said behind closed doors can be verified, the broader picture is real, and it's worth walking through. Because the story of how Cincinnati got to this point is almost as compelling as anything that happens on the court. Back in 2022, Navarro's group bought the tournament from the United States Tennis Association, and he had options. Cities like Charlotte and Chicago made pitches to relocate the event entirely. Bigger markets with more corporate money and more built-in tennis culture. But Navarro looked at all of that and decided to stay put in Mason, Ohio, a town of roughly 36,000 people best known before this for a roller coaster park. And he committed the tournament to that location for the next 25 years, which on paper sounds like a strange bet, until you see what he actually built there. The Lindner Family Tennis Center effectively doubled in size, growing from 20 acres to more than 40, and 13 new courts went up, along with a 2,300-seat sunken stadium that players and broadcasters alike have praised for its atmosphere. Add to that a 56,000-square-foot clubhouse and a 53,000-square-foot indoor training facility, and you start to understand why players who had been coming to this tournament for years were doing double takes when they walked in for the first time. Aryna Sabalenka, the world #1, said as much during a pre-tournament press availability, admitting she barely recognized the place compared to previous years and that it felt like she'd shown up to an entirely different event. And Venus Williams, making her first Cincinnati appearance since 2023, used the phrase tennis paradise to describe what she found waiting for her. So when people talk about the $260 million renovation, this is what they mean. It's not just cosmetic upgrades. It's a full-scale attempt to turn a mid-sized Ohio tournament into something that can compete for status as the unofficial fifth major of the sport. And that ambition is exactly why a player like Alex matters so much to the people running the show. Because a beautiful new stadium still needs someone to fill it, and someone to make people care. And by the time the 2025 tournament rolled around, Alex had become exactly that kind of draw. Not because of manufactured hype, but because of what she'd actually done on court. She'd already made history as the first Filipina to win a WTA Tour title. She'd reached the 4th round at Wimbledon, and she'd climbed into the world's top 20. A remarkable trajectory for a 21-year-old from Quezon City who grew up playing basketball before tennis ever entered the picture. And when you stack that resume against the crowds she was pulling in Toronto, It starts to make sense why a tournament owner looking to justify a $250 million investment would want to be seen standing next to her. Whether that translated into an actual private word of encouragement, as some reports suggested, or simply a broader institutional embrace of her presence, the effect on the ground was the same. Alex arrived in Cincinnati as one of the most talked-about names in the draw, and the projected path in front of her only added to the intrigue. Because sitting 11 spots above her in the seedings was Emma Navarro, the tournament owner's own daughter, ranked 20th in the world at the time, one spot ahead of Alex at 19, and the bracket had them on a collision course for a potential fourth-round meeting, which meant that somewhere down the line, Ben Navarro might find himself watching his daughter compete against the very player his tournament seemed to be embracing as its breakout story. A scenario almost too neat to have been scripted on purpose. Two of the youngest players inside the top 20. One, the daughter of the man who rebuilt the venue. The other, the player whose fan base had become impossible to ignore. And it's the kind of subplot that tennis writers dream about. A father who has poured his fortune into elevating the sport, now watching two rising stars. One, his own blood. The other, a player who represents an entirely different kind of growth opportunity for the tour, circling each other in the draw. But beyond the personal drama, there was real money on the line, and the numbers tell their own story about what a good run in Cincinnati actually means for a player like Alex. The tournament's total prize pool for the women's draw sat above $7.4 million, making it one of the richest non-major stops on the entire calendar. The eventual singles champion would take home more than $750,000. The runner-up, nearly $400,000, and even a semifinal finish was worth well over $250,000. But you didn't need to go that deep for the numbers to matter. Simply reaching the fourth round, which Alex was projected to do as the 17th seed, would net a payday north of $56,000, and a quarterfinal appearance would push that past $116,000. Figures that dwarfed what she'd earned just weeks earlier at the National Bank Open in Toronto, where her combined singles and doubles winnings, the doubles run coming alongside Venus Williams, added up to under $90,000. Still a strong result, but nothing compared to what Cincinnati was offering. And it wasn't just about the paycheck either. Every round advanced in a tournament of this caliber comes attached to ranking points. And with the U.S. Open looming just weeks away as the final Grand Slam of the season, every match Alex won in Cincinnati was building momentum at exactly the right moment, positioning her heading into New York with confidence and points in the bank. So when you put the whole picture together, the renovated stadium, the crowds that had turned Toronto into a home game, the record-setting prize pool, the projected showdown with the owner's own daughter, and a 21-year-old from the Philippines standing in the middle of it all as the player everyone wanted to talk about, it becomes pretty clear why this particular Cincinnati Open felt different from the ones that came before it. This wasn't just another stop on the tour. It was a tournament that had bet $260 million on becoming something bigger than it used to be. And it had found, whether by design or by fortunate timing, a player whose story lined up perfectly with that ambition. A player whose fans didn't just show up, they traveled, they filled stadiums, they turned neutral ground into something that felt like home. And if you're the man who just spent a fortune building the nicest courts in American tennis, that's not something you ignore. That's something you lean into. And for Alex, walking into a venue like that, carrying that kind of expectation, the only thing left to do was play her game. Round by round, match by match, and let the results speak for themselves. Because ranking points and prize money and even the attention of a billionaire tournament owner only means something if you back it up on the court. And with the U.S. Open waiting just around the corner, Cincinnati wasn't the finish line. It was simply the next step in a season that had already rewritten what people expected from her. And however that fourth-round matchup against Emma Navarro ultimately played out, one thing was already true before a single ball was struck in that potential showdown. Alex had turned herself into the kind of story that owners build stadiums for, And that's a harder thing to manufacture than any renovation budget could ever buy.